So I have to say I've spoken at a number of conferences many times over the years in my career, and I've never had the most, this is a incredibly daunting task here to speak after the Prime Minister of Israel. And I want to say that when I go home and I tell my family that I had to speak after Mr. Netanyahu, they are going to be quite sure that the audience completely left and there was no one here. So I want to thank you all for staying. And so let me begin by answering his challenge to industry about if you're not in Israel, come, and if you're here, and do more. And let me just start by explaining a little bit before I even get into cyber about what Qualcomm is, who Qualcomm is, and what we're doing here in Israel. So for those who don't know, Qualcomm, we've been in Israel since the early 1990s. We have over 600 great employees here, and we do major innovation in the wireless industry all right here in Israel, and we do a lot here, and we accept his challenge to do more here in Israel. So for those who don't know Qualcomm, in the old days I used to say when I would speak, raise your hand if you had a cell phone. So of course, obviously, everyone would raise his hand or her hand today. But I can say this, if you have a cell phone in your pocket, and I assume everyone here does, and if that cell phone has 3G or 4G in it, and I assume all of your cell phones do, you're using Qualcomm technology, and odds are you actually have a chip inside your phone that's designed by Qualcomm. So here's what we bring to the table in terms of cyber. So Qualcomm is the world's largest manufacturer of chips for cell phones. We're the world's largest inventor of mobile technology. A good portion of that technology was actually invented here in Israel by our colleagues in Qualcomm Israel. So on the chart it says that there have been 15 billion chips that we've shipped with Qualcomm. Actually last year in fiscal 2014, Qualcomm sold 861 million chips for mobile phones. And in fact, about 1,500 phone models over the course of the year were launched with a Qualcomm chip. So that means basically about new. Having said that, new wireless technology embedded into cell phones and other wireless devices, tablets, the Internet of Things is just starting to happen. And so if you're a Qualcomm employee, one of our core values at Qualcomm, though, is partnering. So I'm going to present our vision of cyber, but a big part of our vision at Qualcomm is to have humility and know that no single company has the answer to cyber, no single part of private industry. But I will say this, we believe that it's actually impossible to talk about cybersecurity without technology and cell phones. It's pervasive. We know everyone's on the internet all the time on their cell phones. And talking about, when Prime Minister Netanyahu referred to the growth in data, so at Qualcomm, every Qualcomm employee is familiar with the phrase, the 1000x challenge. 1000x. And what that means is that globally, every year, mobile data usage is doubling. So if that happens for the next 10 years, we're looking at a 1,000 times increase in wireless usage. How are we going to have wireless networks that can deal with that? How are we going to have wireless devices that can communicate? And most importantly, for purposes of this conference, what a gigantic security challenge, because we know so much of the traffic, so much of the mobile data, so much of data is mobile. How are we going to secure that? So let me just lay out very high level vision from, again, a Qualcomm point of view, and then talk about how this vision can be carried out. And my main message about that is, again, the way to really develop secure solutions is of all, they have to be end-to-end, and they've got to include the edge of the internet, which is in everyone's pocket. And they have to include both hardware and software. Because we design the chips at Qualcomm, we're very committed to having hardware and software solutions. We think that software-only solutions are always going to be more vulnerable to hacking than a solution that's deeply tied into the hardware. And how can you do that? You can't do, one handset vendor can't do that. One OEM can't do that. It has to be done by a wireless ecosystem, and a lot of that is going to start in the chip. So just sketching the three aspects of the vision, starting on the left, we believe that authentication cannot be just passwords. So we know that passwords, a system of password-based authentication is simply invitation to hacking, and that's not going to cut it. So Qualcomm, actually a technology that was started here in Qualcomm Israel, is developed what we call Sense ID. My colleague Asaf Ashkenazi is going to be speaking in greater detail about that when he presents tomorrow. But the idea is that authentication needs to be seamless. It needs to stay on the device. We believe in where you don't have to memorize a password. And we also believe authentication has to be continuous so that the device is constantly aware that it's really you who's using the device. The second layer of cyber in our vision would be what we call preemptive protection. So obviously threats are out there all the time, and the best way to deal with those threats is through cognitive technology that we've developed at Qualcomm and that we're working with partners on. So the idea there is that my phone can, using machine learning, my phone can actually learn who I am. So an example would be I use a currency converter app all the time. I never need to access my contacts through my currency converter app. So if my phone does that, my phone should be able to say, hey, wait a minute, that's not you, Dean. That's not what you do. So there are many examples of this, and we think that by actually using the knowledge that the phone has and gains, that can actually be a strong way to enhance cyber. And then the last leg, which we call data protection, is the idea of trying to have as much of the security protection actually be in the device itself as opposed to in the cloud. Obviously, cloud-based solutions are going to be, play an important role, but we do think that keeping as much of the information as possible and as much of the information protected as possible on the device is a strong deterrent to hacking. If you're a hacker, would you rather hack into a database in the cloud and gain access to 25 million, the information about 25 million people, or would you rather hack into 25 million individual cell phones? So as the top of this slide says, that's a great vision to lay out, but Qualcomm can't do it alone. The wireless industry can't do it alone. It requires strong collaboration between industry and government and academia, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said. So we really think about the interaction between the private sector and the government in three different categories. So starting on the left, regulation. Obviously, the government can, through command and control, say to a particular segment in the industry, you can't do this, you have to do that. That's obviously the most heavy-handed way to deal with security, and the problem with it is, of course, that most regulations are then fixed, and it's very hard to evolve them over time as threats come and go, and we all know in the cyberspace threats come and go every single day. It's so important. Collaboration between government and industry. I'll give you several examples of that when I get to the next slide. And then the last thing, of course, is mitigation. industry knows a lot about threats. In the wireless industry, we deal with threats every single day, and so does government, and there needs to be good information sharing between government and the private sector. So here are a few examples that some of you may not be familiar with of collaboration between government security related issues. One that's kind of very interesting to us. So in the United States Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, Advisory Committee, we call it the TAC. The TAC has been around for many years and gives advice to the FCC in terms of best practices and other input. And in the States, we had terrible problems with mobile phone theft. And this is a very hard problem for the FCC or any regulatory body to just sort of regulate out of existence, both because the mobile phone ecosystem is global, it's not national. The mobile phone ecosystem is so wide. We have different operating systems, we have different handset vendors, we have different chip vendors, we have different carriers, we have open market phones. It's very, very difficult for any regulatory body, even really to get its arms around how to deal with that. And so what the FCC did was they created a task force on which Qualcomm and many other players in the wireless industry participated to work together to develop solutions for mobile device theft. We participated in that, so did many other companies. A report was issued, and in fact, there are very good solutions that have been developed. We're demonstrating one here at this conference with our partner AVG. It was, again, developed in Qualcomm Israel. We call it Safe Switch, and it's, again, a hardware, software-based solution. That's one solution. That's not the only solution, and it was only through collaboration between the private sector and government that solutions could be developed and made public. Another great example of collaboration is the FIDO Alliance. So going back to biometric type authentication, the FIDO Alliance has got a tremendous alliance of different private sector organizations, and most recently both the United States and the UK government are actually members of this alliance to develop interoperable solutions for biometric authentication. Other great examples are Global Platform, which is a group committed to interoperable standards for chips, and the European Commission has their NIS public-private platform, and of course we heard this morning a lot about the Israeli National Cyber Bureau. So then taking that back to Qualcomm, we are very committed to doing our part within the wireless ecosystem. As I mentioned, it's very complex and it requires close collaboration both with partners at every different level. Again, that's device manufacturers, OSs, other software vendors. It requires multiple technologies, 2G, 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, LTE unlicensed, NFC, Bluetooth, almost an endless array of technologies in almost an array of different kinds of devices, phones, tablets, sensors, smart refrigerators, smart cars, you name medical devices. Each one of those and more requires robust security solutions that, as I say, have to be both end-to-end, they have to be hardware-based, and they have to involve close collaboration between government and industry. So with that, conference, and thank you.